Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the You, Me, and BTC podcast. This will be number 156, I guess, as long as nothing crazy happens and we have to sneak in something else for 156. You never know. Thanks for joining us for another regular weekly Thursday show. I am Daniel Brown, and I'm here with
John Stuart
and
Zack Voell.
Yeah, Zack we've had him. Did we have you twice, Zack, or just once?
I think I've only been on here once.
All right. So we had him the first time. It was as a special guest, to talk about who knows what. I think it's fair to say that at this point, whenever you feel like it, you can just be a regular old co-host. So this is Zack Voell. He's been into Bitcoin for, I don't know, a year or two now, and
about 2 years.
Okay, sweet, and plenty of price increases over the past 2 years, so there's nothing wrong with that. And, well, what do we got on the list for today? I guess we'll be talking about, last week, Tim and I did our New Year's episode, which I don't know if either of you have listened to it, but we talked about a lot of stuff that did happen in 2016 and what we expected for 2017. And we have some similar topics for today, not explicitly New Year's stuff, but just the future of Bitcoin, and more specifically, what the naysayers are going to do to attack Bitcoin. And there's not much to go on. We just found an interesting tweet, and we thought we'd talk about it, so we will get to that in a minute. But first, I want to mention Rollin.io, ROLLIN.io. It is a Bitcoin casino, and they have been with us. They were one of our first sponsors, especially for the podcast. They might have actually been the first or second sponsors way back in the day. But they're back with us again, and I want to let you know that they're awesome. If you've listened to the show before, you know I love Bitcoin gambling of all sorts. And Rollin is definitely one of the most innovative, fresh. As soon as you click on the website, you'll see it's pretty fancy. And it's clean and fancy at the same time, which is a hard balance to achieve. You know, some casinos are just rows and rows of numbers and bets. Some casinos are just nothing but colors and flashiness and gifts and whatever. This one strikes an awesome balance. It's clean and yet cool. It's plenty popular. It's not some random site. I'm looking at the total bet counter right now, and there are over 3 billion total bets, approaching 4 billion. So it's, extremely popular. It's not some weird, sketchy site. So if you like Bitcoin gambling, I'm here to tell you that it's a great one to check out. They have a robot if you want to automatically bet with whatever your favorite strategy is. Rollin.io, ROLLIN.io. Go and check it out. I think you'll enjoy it. And I'm going to turn it over now then to John to tell us about that tweet and about the Bitcoin naysayers. Anything good for us, John?
Yeah, I guess so. This is a tweet from the Bitcoin Rat. At Bitcoin Rat is his handle. And the caption is Ratty's Bitcoin predictions for 2017. Happy New Year, everyone. And there's an image with 4 points on it that are his predictions for 2017. Bitcoin naysayers will switch their attacks from Bitcoin is dead approach to point number 1, Bitcoin is just a speculative activity, not a real currency or value transfer asset.
Okay,
Bitcoin
let's go one at a time here.
All right.
I want to. This is a point that I'm not disagreeing with the Bitcoin Rat. I mean, I like his Twitter account. Tweets all kinds of Bitcoin stuff, whatever. But there's something that I think we need to talk about with all these, I guess, not just this first one, is the fact that they've been saying this stuff for ages as well, right? That it's a speculative activity and it's not real currency. So I wouldn't say that it's necessarily a new thing for 2017. Although I will agree with the previous point that they have to switch away from Bitcoin is dead. You can't really say that anymore. I mean, I'm sure some people do and will. And it might crash again if it's in kind of a bubble right now at like a frickin' 1100. So yeah, but I would say it's going to get harder and harder and harder for them to say that Bitcoin is dead. So I agree that they might have to switch their emphases onto some of this other stuff. But yeah, what do you guys think? Is that something they will do? Is it even a good point? Is it? I don't think we would agree.
One thought I had was like, so obviously there are tons of people who say Bitcoin is dead, and they've been saying it since like Bitcoin was first created. But I think there's like an equal number of people who say Bitcoin is dead as those who say Bitcoin will exceed or break $1 million or whatever within the next 2 years. In my opinion, they're two sides of the same coin. Neither of them necessarily have their heads screwed on straight as far as their perspective on cryptocurrency and stuff. But I think there's like an equal number of those people, neither of which are correct.
Yeah, that's an incredibly good point. And I think about that sometimes too. I mean, same idea, scrolling through Twitter, there's all kinds of people that say, you know, this is the last year that you'll ever be able to buy Bitcoin below 10,000.
Yeah.
Or whatever, even just like 2,000. And maybe they're right, but I hesitate to latch onto those ideas because, well, for two reasons. One, at present time, it just sounds sketchy. Well, you know, when all these people are like, oh, come buy Bitcoin right now, the price is going to be outrageous. In fact, they do that a lot with altcoins or scam coins. I saw a couple recently that they put in like prediction charts and like literally it was just like an upward curve for the next 10 years. And they're like, oh, well, you must buy it then because it's going to go up tons and tons. It's like, well, it's based on what?
Yeah.
So I totally agree with you where there are people, as much as we love Bitcoin, there are people that don't have their heads screwed on right and say nothing other than how the price will go up. And I agree that is just as dangerous.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, like, I'm definitely not one to be against it breaking $1 million, even like 50,000, but I just don't see it as a realistic possibility, especially in like the next year or two.
That was going to be my other point. Like, at present time, it sounds sketchy, but then moving forward, it might not happen.
Yeah.
And people would freak out. Well, I mean, moving forward, it could happen too.
Right.
But, yeah, exactly. As we always say on this show, I don't know. Yeah, John, have you seen any crazy people that think Bitcoin is going to the moon tomorrow? How common is that in your circles?
I don't know about my circles. I feel like I don't interact with people as much as I used to in Bitcoin.
Right.
But yeah, I feel like it's always been like that, and there's a lot of people like that, to be honest, at least from the people that we've met. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But yeah, sometimes it gets on my nerves a little bit.
Right.
People are just so like fanboyish about it.
Oh yeah. It honestly, when I see it too much, it bothers me because when I see it with an altcoin, I'm like, oh, that's a joke, a scam, whatever. And then people do it with Bitcoin, and then it makes me think, oh, crap, did I fall prey to Bitcoin? Is it all just some big scheme or scam? Obviously, it's not. I've done 155 episodes about why I don't really think it is. But it's still, there's always that seed of sketchiness. And if you can give that seed of sketchiness to me, then to somebody who's never really learned much about Bitcoin, they're going to dismiss it right away when they see stuff like that. So I guess you just have to be careful. And that reminds me of one of our role models here, Andreas Antonopoulos. He gave a speech probably within the last month. And at the end in the Q&A, I think they actually ran it as a Let's Talk Bitcoin episode. And at the end of the talk, there was Q&A, and somebody asked him just pretty much point blank, like, how much of your wealth is in Bitcoin and how much should be in Bitcoin? And I liked his answer, as I like a lot of things that he says. He basically said, well, for me, I have a lot invested, just because I do. But for you, you should invest basically as much as you understand Bitcoin and its potential and how it works and why it works and what it works for. Basically, you should invest based on how much you understand it. And the other limiter is how much you can afford to lose. And again, we've said it since the very beginning, and I think any smart person would say this about any investment ever, including the US dollar itself. Never invest more than you're able and willing to lose. So, yeah. All right. So there was our rant. How Bitcoin could die tomorrow, or it might not go to the moon. Well, it's a fact. So, all right. Well, then, let's get into this point just a little bit more. Is it just a speculative activity? Is it a real currency? That's another thing that's come up with me recently. With the holidays, I had some family asking me about Bitcoin mining and asking me about, well, where do these new Bitcoins come from? Like, who gives them value? Is it really, where does that value come from? Is it even a real currency? And it's hard to explain. What would be your answers to that? Where does the value come from? Who makes the new Bitcoins have value? Any thoughts?
Well, as much as I don't necessarily like them, but Coinbase does a decent job at explaining this pretty simply. They have one FAQ section where they just say, look, these currencies, Bitcoin and Ether, which they now sell also, get their value as people are interested in the currency buy it, just basic supply and demand. So it doesn't necessarily have intrinsic value, or it's not a material substance necessarily, although even that might be debated, like gold or silver is, but supply and demand gives it its value.
Right.
But the tricky thing is when people ask, when they want a simple explanation of what is Bitcoin and where does it get its value, especially if they don't know a lot about it, you just can't, it's frustrating sometimes. You just can't give them the simple answer that they want, because it's just a little more complicated than that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, geez. I mean, it's hard enough to explain value itself. There have been entire books and 4-year classes or 4-year educational programs just about value or whatever, let alone how value applies with Bitcoin, which is so new and still people don't completely understand it, even the experts. So yeah, I agree that it's a nearly impossible question to answer. But one thing that we can say that we've said this since the beginning on this show, and so have other people. It's not like it's our idea. But one important point to make to anyone who questions where the value comes from is, well, I mean, the dollar certainly has zero use other than maybe as, toilet paper or whatever. So, and even gold. I mean, gold has some use and, physical, real world atoms and molecules value and color and weight. All right, so gold does have some of usefulness and value in that sense. But even that, a gigantic portion of the value that is given to gold is just the market. It's just what people say it's worth and what they're willing to give for it and what they believe about it and stuff like that.
Yeah. And I was talking to a hedge fund friend of mine who works at a hedge fund in Chicago, because some of his friends own and mess around with Bitcoin. But he was like, oh, I don't touch that stuff. It's impossible to quantify, too risky. It has no intrinsic value on its own. And I was like, well, neither do any of the other fiat currencies that the world uses right now. All of them are based on nothing, and except no one mandates Bitcoin's value, whereas they mandate the value for all these other currencies. So it's the same thing. They're not any different in that respect.
I think I agree. It's every single thing. I mean, yes, some things have physical, real world value, but tons and tons and tons of things also just have value because that's what people say they're worth, and that's how the world works. And Bitcoin has value. Even though it's not physical, even Bitcoin has real world usefulness in terms of how quickly you can move money from place to place and how cheaply. So anyway, the discussion could go on and on. We've had similar discussions before, so I don't want to go too far into it. But yeah, I guess I just wanted to cover this first point about whether Bitcoin is a real currency or a real value transfer asset. So I think we gave it a fair discussion. Are we ready to touch on number 2, John?
Yeah, we can go on to number 2.
All right, what is it?
Number 2. This is to recap. This is what Bitcoin naysayers will switch their attacks from. Will say instead of saying Bitcoin is dead.
Right.
Okay. I was trying to read it straight how it was, and that didn't work with the sentence that I was trying to form. Anyways, the second thing that they will say instead of Bitcoin is dead is that Bitcoin activity is wasteful of electricity.
Okay. This one is tough because it does use a crap ton of electricity. I learned the other day that Buttload is an actual scientific measurement. I forget it. I want to say it was something about wine. They measure stuff in buttloads. I don't remember. Anyway, yeah. So it does use a buttload of electricity. So what do you guys think? Is it wasteful? It could be. I don't know. I guess the world does have a finite amount of energy, kind of. Is it wasteful?
Well, this is not necessarily directly related to this, like, wastefulness, but is related to electricity. I was thinking one of the best ways to, like, create free money would be to assemble a solar panel or geothermal energy apparatus or something, and then run a mining operation off of that, because you're not paying any money to the energy grid for the electricity you're using. So you'd just be via the Bitcoin mining operation, creating free money and stuff.
Yeah, that's actually a very true statement, I think. I actually think it was the same speech that Andreas Antonopoulos gave. I could be wrong, but anyway, somebody said this recently, where there are people, little communities in China that are not connected to the main power grid because it's not as connected, especially in remote places. And there are towns that just make their own power. It's coming back to me now. It was Andreas who said all this. And he said that they are doing just that because they have their own power plants. And, depending on the time of day or the time of year, sometimes they need more or less power just for the town. And sometimes it's not worth turning off the entire power station. It could take a whole day to turn it off. And at times they would just burn and lose and get rid of electricity because it wasn't worth turning off the power station. And so as Bitcoin came along, they, instead of just burning the energy, they converted it into Bitcoin. They mined with it.
Yeah.
And the officials sort of kind of tried to work against that for whatever reason they could come up with. But Andreas was pointing out that would never work because the officials in that town and all the people in that town are making money and making a living off of that power station and off of that Bitcoin mining. And yeah, so that's exactly what it is. Bitcoin mining is converting electricity into money. I don't really think that's disputable. You can dispute maybe whether or not that's moral. I mean, if it's wasteful, whether the Bitcoin money is really as valuable as the electricity. So you could dispute whether or not it's good or bad or right or wrong or wasteful or not. But I think you made a fair point, Zach, that's exactly what happens. It is converting electricity into money, and that is incredibly beneficial for certain people in certain situations.
So theoretically, as long as the sun's shining with like solar panels and stuff, and with the decentralization of power grids and stuff, there will always be an unlimited supply of energy that can be used. So I don't necessarily know if it's something that could be wasted as much as just like misused. And honestly, I've never heard anyone say this before, that electricity is wasted. But like, I think it makes sense, I guess, but I've never heard anyone say it.
I think we've heard this before, but the interesting thing is that I don't think we've heard it from naysayers, because most people who are naysayers don't know enough or think enough about Bitcoin to realize that. Most of the people who know how much electricity it uses are people who are into it, and it tends to be more of a thing where they're like, this is something we need to watch out for in the future, because there might come a time where it's actually using so much electricity that we're losing value by using Bitcoin. People have said stuff like that, but
Right.
I haven't
Okay.
heard people just be like, it's a waste of electricity. Stop using it.
Yeah.
I think I would agree that I've heard the point, but it hasn't been one of the main ones. And the exact same thing that John said. It's not really from the naysayers. It's just this idea that people talk about. And so I guess the way you argue against it being wasteful is I guess what you have to do is point out that the mining is what secures Bitcoin. It's what makes Bitcoin work. So you're losing electricity, but you're gaining a quick and easy and decentralized currency. And we just had this big discussion about value, and different people are going to value electricity and an easy, free currency in different ways. But I mean, that's just where you turn to the free market. Like, I don't know which one is more valuable overall forever, but I think it's fair to let each person make their own decision and try to make money and decide if they want to mine Bitcoin and make burn electricity for money, or if they want to just keep the It's the free market. Yeah, people are going to do what they're going to do, and I don't think anybody really has the official answer, or even could have the official answer about which one is really better forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, it all comes down to the future and how things work with energy and with Bitcoin, how its value goes and development goes. I don't think it can be definitively answered, but at the same time, I have my doubts about it really being wasteful, because I believe that Bitcoin is incredibly valuable. So that's where I'm at. Okay, so does that put us at number 3 then, John?
That would be number 3. And the third thing that naysayers will say instead of Bitcoin is dead is that Bitcoin mining is controlled by shady Chinese consortiums, or consortiums, if you want to say it like that.
Yeah, they could pull a Trump and say, oh, but China's involved, it must be bad. I mean, I think I've heard plenty of people say this in Bitcoin and out of Bitcoin. All kinds of people, like Wired and Gizmodo. I don't have any specific examples, but those are the kinds of articles that come to mind when Wired writes about Bitcoin or Gizmodo writes about Bitcoin. I can easily see them saying like, oh, by the way, a bunch of people in China use Bitcoin, and that could be a bad thing. We actually had an article kind of prepared for today that was, oh, shoot, I don't have it up at this second. Where was that article from about China?
It was Business Insider.
Okay, yeah, so exactly. And we might get into some of those points. But they were basically saying that China is driving the recent Bitcoin price increases for X, Y, and Z reasons. So yeah, that's something that people talk about, I think, all the time, inside and outside of Bitcoin. Everyone is always saying, oh, yeah, but China. And sometimes they're saying it negatively, like, oh, that's kind of sketchy. And sometimes they're just saying it kind of factually. Okay, yeah, tons of people in China are using Bitcoin, or at least looking into it. It varies, of course. But yeah, I think I would agree that this is something that the naysayers can and will easily try to twist into their narrative. Would you guys agree?
Yeah, I think we've heard it a decent amount.
Yeah, I would agree, but like as far as I understand, the only real concern from China is if Chinese miners accumulated enough computing power to like 51% mining power to overpower the blockchain.
Right.
And
yep.
I was talking with Jerry Brito, who leads Coin Center, which is a Bitcoin-friendly policy advocate nonprofit in DC, over the summer about this same problem. And he said basically, yeah, like it's a real problem. Theoretically, it's possible for someone to accumulate enough computing power to overpower the blockchain. But like that's so far into the future that we don't really need to worry about it right now. Like it could happen. Yeah. So like don't say it's altogether an impossibility, but we're nowhere near to that point right now at all.
Because even in China, there are several different miners and several different operations and several different pools, and they're all competing with each other, and then the pools themselves all have, thousands of miners under them. So I would totally agree that just because they're in the lines, just because a bunch of mining is between the lines that people say is China, doesn't mean that one person is magically controlling all of that. I mean, that's like, 100% of Bitcoin mining happens on Earth. Oh, guys, Earth is going to take over Bitcoin. I mean, yeah. So, and this, Antonopoulos. We haven't talked about him in a while, but here it is today. We're catching up. We've covered this before, but he used to, in several different speeches, he made the point that, he had this whole chain of protections against a 51% attack. He's like, just because one pool approaches 51%, it doesn't mean that they're going to get there. And even if they did get there, people are going to back out. And even if people didn't back out, they still don't have control right away. And, there were more and more safeguards where not really safeguards, but just points that he was making like, but even if this happened, it still wouldn't ruin Bitcoin. But even if that did happen, it still wouldn't ruin Bitcoin. But even if this and this and this and this happened, we could still avoid problems by doing this. And he just would basically it was Antonopoulos's argument that just what you said, Zach, that a 51% attack is a long way off.
Yeah.
And, all kinds of stuff. So,
yeah. So I'm interested to hear that lecture you just mentioned. Could you link to it in the podcast notes? I don't know if any other, all your listeners have already heard it, but I'm curious to hear it. If you could link to it. Okay.
Absolutely. So I'll put the first link that I'll put in the show notes will be the one that I know of, the one that was within the last month, about remote communities in China, and the one with the Q&A about how much he's invested in Bitcoin. That one I know I can find, and I'll make that the first link. If you find a second link in the show notes, I'm not sure if I'll be able to find it, but if you listeners are spotting the second link, that I'll look for one that is this 51% argument. So look in the show notes, guys. If there's two, that'll be those two. You, me, and BTC.com/E156. That's how we do our episodes. You, me, and BTC.com/E156.
Hi, have you heard about Bitcoin? Not Bitcoin, but Bipcoin. Bravo, India, Papa, Coin. Bipcoin is a new cryptocurrency that you can start mining today for free on ordinary computers. Unlike most altcoins, Bipcoin is not a clone of Bitcoin. Bipcoin is based on entirely new, more recent, and better code called CryptoNote. So unlike Bitcoin, Bipcoin has truly untraceable transactions, and we're working on adding distributed DNS functionality to Bipcoin. We're calling this .bip, and it will provide uncensorable domain names in an easy-to-use interface. Unlike previous systems attempting this, .bip will be simple for both a website owner and for people viewing websites. This will get it the worldwide adoption we need to keep speech free, and cyber squatting will not be a problem. Please help out with a donation or just share this with your friends. If you can't chip in some cash or Bitcoin to save free speech around the world, because there are incoming regimes that hate honest criticism. Go to bipcoin.org. Once again, that's Bravo, India, Papa, coin.org.
So, another thing I was thinking of, this goes to a conversation we had earlier briefly, and I don't know if John knows anything more about it, but from what I understand, the idea of keeping the blockchain from being overpowered by 51% of computing power being accumulated in one spot is an idea behind the difference or the argument between proof of work and proof of share.
Right. Yeah, I don't want to claim to be perfectly versed in proof of stake or even proof of work, but I could kind of see that argument, because with proof of stake, you have to actually have the money to have control. You have to have a stake in the currency to have control. But at the same time, you have to have money to accomplish work, so it's kind of the same thing. You have to have money to mine Bitcoin, or to have stake in a different coin. So, yeah, there's that. But I guess that's all I can really say. I don't know all the ins and outs of each one. So,
yeah, I wouldn't say I know that much about it either. So,
all right, cool. So when you don't know anything, you move on. I guess that puts us at number 4 then, John. Last one here.
Yeah, number 4 and the last one. Bitcoin is used by criminals and terrorists.
Oh,
this one drives me up the wall more than any others.
Our favorite one of all time.
Yeah, he even points it out there. He in parentheses. Yes, that old chestnut, but they will drag it out more and more in 2017. And this is another one that might come back to Trump with his kind of fear-mongering about, like, oh, the terrorists and the Chinesians and the Rushinians and whoever else, the Koreans, whatever.
Rushinians.
Russians, whatever. You know, I don't see their threat of terrorism. What, you know, some people say it's made up, and yeah, obviously it's not. I'm not saying that there isn't terrorism, but I don't see them backing away at all from using terrorism or drugs or whatever as an excuse to increase their power. That's what I was trying to say. I don't see them moving away from that at all. And so if they have to use crime and terror and drugs as an excuse to crack down on Bitcoin, I absolutely, positively agree that they will continue to do so. And especially with people like Trump in power, I could easily see those crackdowns increasing. I was just reading an article today about his relationship with Jeff Sessions, who is somebody in his cabinet. I don't know all the details. I don't follow it that much. But basically, he appointed someone who is extremely anti-encryption. And to me, it's the same idea. They're going to use terrorism to crack down on encryption, and they're going to use it to crack down on Bitcoin. Any thoughts there, guys?
So one of my favorite blogs to read is Priceonomics, and they have a great article published a year or two ago, I think, called Why Crime Needs Cash. And they basically argue in depth with like a bunch of analysis and graphs and data and just basic reasoning and stuff that like criminals prefer cash. And even if some crime does occur with like cryptocurrencies and stuff, it ultimately doesn't even matter because of like the conveniences of cash itself, and just because like they'll default to it no matter what, they prefer cash and will use it. So eliminating cryptocurrencies won't necessarily at all reduce the amount of crime. Just because like the argument is basically just saying crime needs money, and they'll use cryptocurrencies or cash currencies. It doesn't matter.
We've been saying that for years.
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, there's all these new anonymous cryptocurrencies, Monero and Dash and whatever. And those certainly have benefits for different people in different situations. But yeah, I mean, real hardened gangsters and criminals, you know, drug lords, whatever, they don't want to bother with Bitcoin when they can just stick with physical anonymous cash that they've used for forever. I mean, for decades. And so why would they? Yeah, I mean, if it benefits us, if Bitcoin benefits us, yeah, then it's going to have benefits for them too. And so, yeah, there are going to be people that use it and find ways to use it and try to use it. But it doesn't matter. I mean, they could do the same thing with cash, and they have been doing the same thing with cash for decades. So are we going to outlaw the dollar? Yeah, we should. Yeah, so Priceonomics sounds interesting. I've never read it or heard of it, but I'll look it up and I'll pop that in the show notes too for all of our listeners. Yeah, so where do you guys want to go next? Do you want to hit on this China article just a little bit? Yeah, we could squeeze it in. There's not a ton to say. It's like John pointed out, it's the article from Business Insider. The headline is that China is behind the latest Bitcoin craze. And I could read bits and pieces here, but I'm just going to try to boil it down into a few sentences. Like I said, we don't need to get into it too much. I just want to touch on it and see what you guys think. The idea is basically that the yuan, or the won, however people want to say it, is being regularly devalued. I mean, just like it is in all these other countries. Venezuela is one of the biggest examples, Zimbabwe, wherever else. Name your country, India. And in China, the same thing is kind of happening. I think it's less blatant and less extreme. But yeah, it's pretty clear the yuan is losing value. Some people say it's because of a stronger dollar, which some people say is because of suggested interest rate hikes that might be coming, maybe. So the bottom line, there's not much to it. The bottom line is that the yuan is losing value, and so people are trying to get out of it and get into Bitcoin. That's really all there is to it. There's all these numbers and stats, but that's all. It's pretty simple when it comes down to it. So what do you guys think? Does that seem like a real possibility? Is China the real driver, or do you expect that it's these more currency-ravaged countries like Venezuela and India? Any thoughts on how much China would be behind this?
Yeah, my first instinct is to say that it's not because of China, because, I mean, when all this stuff with Greece happened, people were like, oh, Bitcoin's going to go through the roof because of Greece, and that didn't really happen exactly. I mean, there may have been little bumps along the way and stuff, but this is a different case because it is China, because there's so many more people there, because Bitcoin is already a thing there. I mean, we were just talking about how the mining is so concentrated there. Bitcoin has exposure in China, and it's a way bigger, more populated country. So maybe, I don't know.
So there's this Washington Post article that was just written yesterday, and it has a graph that correlates Bitcoin price movement with yuan devaluation, and it's almost a perfect correlation since November 2015 up until the end of 2016, except for the spike this past June and July doesn't really account for that. But besides that, like the devaluation of the yuan and Bitcoin price movement are almost exactly perfectly correlated, which is fascinating to me, and leads me to believe that, yeah, sure, China, because, yeah, in part of how much mining activity is concentrated in China, but also because of the yuan devaluation and how many Bitcoin users China has right now, is driving a lot of the price activity. But also more than that, like the article goes on to say, which the phrase I love, it said Bitcoin has a great year right now because of all the political turmoil in the US and around the world. People are starting to see Bitcoin as a disaster hedge, is the term they used. And so people are realizing, well, Bitcoin is disconnected from like the economic and political world in a lot of ways that other things aren't. So I'm going to put some of my wealth in Bitcoin to diversify and sort of protect myself. It's a disaster hedge.
Yeah, I think that, you know, I was kind of saying how Venezuela and India are in a lot more catastrophic situations right now. But I think part of the reason that it still is correlating with the yuan devaluation, even though it's not as catastrophic in China, I think, again, I don't have any specific statistics right in front of me, but I think that China is just a much bigger and a much more impactful, is that a word? Impactful economy. And so even though it's not as catastrophic, you know, the money devaluation, just because it's bigger and I guess richer, you know, the people in China are probably richer on average than the people in Venezuela. That's just a guess, but still, that's how it seems to me, is that because it's a bigger and more powerful economy, then the movers and shakers there are able to drive the Bitcoin price, even though the same thing didn't quite happen in Greece, or, you know, hasn't quite happened as specifically in Venezuela or whatever. Again, that's just a guess on my part, but that's where my head goes.
So I'm not really sure. I haven't read a lot about it, but is the Chinese government like friendly towards Bitcoin given all the activity China has as far as mining and stuff? Because my guess would be they're at least neutral or probably not so friendly, but I really have no idea. Do you guys know?
Yeah, so I mean, we've done stories on this kind of stuff before, and, stuff that like Russia and Putin have said about Bitcoin. I think what it comes down to, again, it's no specifics in front of me. That's pretty much true of this show all the time. It's an opinion show for anyone that hasn't guessed yet. But I would guess, basically what it seems like it comes down to for me is that as a whole, the government might not really like Bitcoin because it's a threat to the government. Of course, it's a threat to any government. And so in general, they might not like it and might try to work against it. But the problem is that there is so much corruption, just accepted corruption, an obvious, blatant corruption and bribery, to the point where, yes, the government technically doesn't really want Bitcoin, but it doesn't matter because the specific people in power might have whatever reason to buy it or accept it or support it anyway, which is also like we were talking about with those remote countries or those remote villages that get into Bitcoin mining. Like, even if they outlawed it, like it wouldn't really matter because the officials need it. And it's what writes their paycheck, and so that's what it seems like to me. It's technically they might be against it, but there's tons of people in any government, and they work against each other all the time. So there are plenty of people that don't really care that it's not in their favor necessarily. So just guesses again. So. All right, well, then I guess that takes us to advice of the week then, and I'll just keep, just like I just kind of ranted about, I'm going to make my advice to make guesses. Make guesses when you don't have specifics. Don't worry about specifics. Just say what you think is true, and maybe it'll be true. I don't know. It could be. You never know. That's my advice this week is make guesses based on stuff that you think.
So I actually just thought of something that I wanted to say a long time ago, and I just completely forgot about it because we went off on a bunch of other stuff.
All right, do it.
Well, actually, I wanted to say it at the end, but I thought of it at the beginning.
All right.
And I just forgot.
That sounds like poetry or something.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. Anyways, what I wanted to say was that list of 4 things that we read from the tweet. The first time I read it, I kind of thought it was, I don't know. The funny thing about it is that every single one of those 4 things has already been used.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And so I don't know if the guy who was tweeting was making a point about the fact that people are just throwing out whatever arguments they can think of, or if he just actually thinks that's what people are going to try to say. Like, I don't know. We've seen all that stuff before, so to me it was kind of just funny reading that, like, oh, because the latest thing didn't work, people are just going to go back and try the same things they tried last year again.
Yeah, which I think is absolutely the way it would go. The naysayers don't care if they're wrong. They just are going to say whatever they can to make Bitcoin look bad, and it seems pretty simple to me that they don't care if it's been debunked over and over. They're going to say stuff to harass Bitcoin, and if they have to resort to terrorism, they'll resort to terrorism. So I agree that it is pretty obnoxious. All right, well, Zach, anything good for us? Advice of the week. It can be kind of random and dumb like mine, or it could be legitimate, like go do this, look this up right now and read about it. It could be anything you want.
Okay, yeah. So my advice for the week might sound a little odd, but then I have a quote to read. But I have reasons for my first bit of odd advice, and it is, if right now you don't hold as much Bitcoin as you might want to, or any at all, my advice would be not to buy any more Bitcoin.
Yeah, so the only caveat there is that we have to clarify that none of the 3 of us are financial experts. So that's just an idea. You know, maybe it would be a good time to buy. You never know.
True. But, no, fair enough. It's your money, and I don't like. There's no guarantee that we've necessarily reached the peak of euphoria now with this recent price spike. But that would just be my 2 cents. But it's your money. You can use it however you want. But then, so the second piece is from head of business development at BTC.com. And she said, if the demonetization, as we've seen in countries like India and Venezuela, continues, I expect to see a blossoming of Bitcoin interest. Another trend I see emerging is Bitcoin security. Many users are realizing their Bitcoins are not safe in exchanges and are switching to wallets that have beefier security or using cold storage. So that's it.
All right, there it is. So there will be more interest expected from countries that desperately need better currencies. And more interest in the infrastructure there too, wallets and whatever. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us today. As always, there's more fun to be had at you, me, and BTC.com. If, for whatever reason, you never got around to listening to them, there are 155 other episodes of the show. Actually, even more than that. There's several, 20 maybe some live shows. There's several special interviews. There are articles and opinions and tools, all kinds of stuff, reviews, tutorials, advice, links to helpful stuff, whatever you want. All of it is at you, me, and BTC.com. Come back next week and join us for the fun. And special thanks again to Zack for joining us as a co-host, and maybe we'll have you back some more before long. Thanks to John for the music that you're all listening to right now. And we'll see you next Thursday. Peace, everyone.